What's going on, everybody? It's AuroraYG here, coming at you with a brand new video. And with national season coming to a close and worlds being shut off for the entire year, it seems like in terms of official events, the Yu-Gi-Oh season is coming to a close. Hi, yes, so I am completely aware of the championship in Rosemont, Illinois from July 15th to July 17th. I just decided not to use it for this video because I'm assuming if you're going to be entering an event like that, you're already going to have the caliber to actually know what you're playing for that event. Plus, it's in the middle of the month, so there won't be much time after this video drops for you to actually prepare for it. And so, honestly, just kind of take everything I say with the format being over with a grain of salt in this video. Thank you, and enjoy the video. However, that doesn't mean you have to stop playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Whether you're just playing with your friends here and there, or stopping your local tournament stores every week, I think that the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Spirit should never die out in players, and I think there should always be on the lookout for what could be new and hot in terms of the top decks. And with that being said, I want to show you guys my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the July 2022 format, post-national season, and with no worlds in sight. I'm going to be using a little bit of nationals info to actually get this tier list, however, a lot of it is also going to be coming from personal opinion, and from the opinions of other content creators in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Space, and so with that in mind, please don't harass anybody here in my comment section, or other creators or their comment sections, because at the end of the day, it's just a card game, and there's no need. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for July 2022. So first up, we have a newcomer into the competitive scene, being Marincess. So Marincess actually just got their newest pieces of support very recently in Legendary Duelist Duels from the Deep, along with, I believe, the Umi stuff and new Shark support. And guys, people really underestimated what this deck could do. Marincess actually took a few top slots at some state championships, and so with that, I'm going to put it in the Tier 2 category. So basically, I like to think of Marincess as a better at Ignister in terms of its playstyle. So if you don't know what Marincess does, it revolves around its field spell Marincess Battle Ocean to allow it to make different types of towers. So much like at Ignister, it's a Cyberse archetype that revolves around ending on a tower, so it seems pretty simple, right? Well, the thing is, unlike at Ignister, the deck actually can play through hand traps a lot better, except for things like Nibiru, but of course things like Crossout do exist to mitigate that, and they can actually set up extra disruptions. The deck has a lot of level 4 waters, meaning it gets easy access to Bahamut Shark and Totally Awesome, and they even have access to crazy cards like Marincess Wave, which is not only an imperm, but it can be used as a hand trap that also turns all of your monsters into towers. Now by towers, what monster do I actually mean? Well, typically the end board, while it isn't unaffected itself, it does revolve around getting other cards to do it for it. We have Marincess Aqua Argonaut. Marincess Aqua Argonaut is a brand new boss monster that the deck desperately needed that came out of the most recent set, which is a spell or trap negate on the opponent's turn that also specials the things equipped to it, which is a heavy gimmick along with the Marincess playstyle due to their Battle Ocean, being able to bounce things on your turn and return your own things to the hand, which, keep in mind, a lot of the deck is just extenders, and being able to prevent your opponent from attacking any other monster while it's in the extra monster zone. They also don't have as many issues going second as a deck like at Ignister might have, because they do have access to Marincess Great Bubble Reef, which is essentially their own pseudo access code, because while it can't attack multiple times or anything like that, it does get incredibly large and can recycle your banished Marincess in order to help you OTK. And keep in mind, it's not just the Aqua Argonaut that can become unaffected. Anything they put in their extra monster zone that uses Marincess Crystal Heart as material can become a towers, meaning Great Bubble Reef, and of course meaning something like Marbled Rock in case they fall back on a bad boss monster. Marincess Coral Triangle has also made their incredible Marincess Wave trap card searchable, so it's a lot easier to set up disruptions with the deck while also having the towers to fall back on as a secondary option. I think Marincess is actually a really good deck that a lot of people are sleeping on, even though now a lot of them are actually finding out how good it is, and it's actually something I'm building myself, and you can honestly probably prepare to see it in a lot of different local tournament stores and higher level events, should there be any. Next up, we have Dinosaur, and as always, Dinosaur is going to have to drop down to the Rogue category. One misc, really not much else to say there. The deck is still incredibly fragile, dies to things like Lancia, and one hand trap kind of just kills it, even with even if it had multiple misc, to be honest. So you'll definitely be able to snag some wins here and there, especially with a more going second oriented build, or maybe even one that runs like Dogmatica or something like that. But for now, I honestly wouldn't say that Dinosaur is a deck that's worth it, unless you really have nothing else that you can pick up. Next up, we have Invoked variants, and I'm actually going to put Invoked variants just under Marincess, so Honestly, if you really want to play a fusion deck that can take advantage of the branded package, just go ahead and play Despia, which we will get to in a minute, because Invoked is sort of just the budget player's dream version of it. I do have a Dogmatica Invoked branded Shaddoll deck list without Alubers up on my channel, which I will, as always, link up in the top right, but I really don't think it's worth it overall compared to something like Despia, unless you have the money to actually, you know, throw around and mess around with Invoke stuff instead, even if Despia is, you know, more expensive. It's sort of one of those decks that you actually have to commit to and actually enjoy playing it in order to actually want to play it over something else. El Shaddoll Winda is a hell of a card, however, any deck that uses the branded package can actually make Winda for free off of one card, and so there's little incentive to run Invoked over any other fusion package right now. Next up we have Despia, and this of course will be our first tier 1 deck. Despia was still tearing it up, not as much as it has been like before, back when the deck was still super hyped from the structure deck. However, it is still definitely a top tier deck to look out for, not due to its end board of course, but due to the sheer consistency and hand advantage that it can get, especially with things like Guardian Chimera, allowing it for not only pops for disruptions, but also being able to draw into more cards, which could be either hand traps or more gas for next turn. Mirror Jade is still a hell of a boss monster, being able to not only non-target banish that sends for cost to trigger during the end phase, but also being able to nuke the opponent's board during the end phase makes it a hard monster to out for sure. Next we have Tri-Brigade variants, and Tri-Brigade has actually been doing a little bit better. It actually got a top, or I believe a win at one of the state championships, which I think is really cool, even if it is like a weird Zoo Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk matchup. However, I still don't think the deck is any higher than a tier 2, because let's be real, it probably just snuck in and just kind of got a free win on the spot because people already forgot what the Tri-Brigades do, because it really has been almost a year since the deck has been viable, huh? That's crazy. Yeah, overall, unless the deck gets some new support, or if, you know, another good Beast Warrior or Wing Beast archetype drops, or, you know, maybe when the new Scareclaw stuff drops in, I believe, November, December? Whenever Darkwing Blast is, I don't know. Actually, no, I think it's October that Darkwing Blast drops. Maybe when that comes out, we'll see a bit more Tri-Brigade builds, but overall, it's still just a fine deck. I still play the Lyrilusk build over any other build, because it is a little bit more combo heavy, so it can play through interruptions really easily, as well as being able to end on a really strong board with a lot of disruptions and follow-up. I'm sorry I'm not being as descriptive as I usually am with my tier list, but there really isn't as much to say for this one, considering that there's not going to be any like super massive events for a while, and so it's more just like a sort of for fun, hey, here's what decks are strong, here's what could be a little bit stronger, and you know, stuff like that. Next up we have Predaplant, and I think that Predaplant deserves a tier 2 slot, mainly due to the branded variants that have been running around that I think have actually been doing pretty good at the last few regionals that we had, and I think in some of the state championships as well. Branded Predaplant takes a lot of advantage out of things like super polymerization, while also still being able to utilize things like Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer that has seen a lot less play because it does have access to Darlingtonia Cobra, which can search your Fusion Destiny should you not want to search like Branded Fusion or something like that. Their newest support out of Dimension Force really has made the deck a lot better. Being able to spread mass counters with Predaplant Triantis makes something like Dragastapelia basically a skill drain, which is really nice. And then they have access to really strong boss monsters like Predaplant Triflovertum, which is a great super poly target, and keep in mind this deck not only has searchable super poly, but its own archetypal super poly that's even easier to access. Plus, Predaplant Triantis actually allows you to use your scales, including itself and Predaplant Bufollicula, as fusion material, and so that Predaprime Fusion that is the archetypal super poly that you can search is almost always going to be live using both of your Pendulum Scales and your opponent's monster, making your own boss monster while also being able to spread counters with the Triantis. Branded Fusion's also just a free plus because instead of sending something like Despian Tragedy, you basically send the deck's own version of that in Predaplant Biblisp, which will trigger to search for any Predaplant monster if it's sent to the graveyard, and being able to revive itself later on should you need the extra fusion material. Overall, I think the deck is really good and really fun, however, it is being a little bit held back by a paywall, but we are getting the Legendary Duelist set, I believe, or whatever kind of Duelist pack it is in this month that actually reprints all of its stuff that's really expensive, and so it'll be really nice to see that, and maybe we'll see some more Predaplant players running around after that. God, this is a lot of, like, what is it? Not onomatopoeia, whatever it says when it's, like, multiple different, like, consonant sounds. It's just, like, Predaplant players. Ugh, gross. Alliteration, that's what it is. So next up, we have It's Morbin Time, aka Dinomorphia, and I actually love this deck. So I'm going to try to put my biases aside, however, I will be putting my own experience to the test to actually say my thoughts on this deck. because I think this deck is actually so strong right now. So we've actually seen the deck do a lot more things in the last few regionals and some more state championship stuff, as well as some table 500 looking things from certain content creators, and this deck is actually a lot stronger than a lot of people like to make it out to be. Against anything that's essentially tier 2 or below, they're going to have a lot of trouble actually outing Dynamorphia Rexsturm, which is not only a walking skill drain, but even better considering that it says they cannot even activate, which basically shuts off anything that sends for cost or would otherwise plus them. Granted, it doesn't stop floodgate effects like El Shaddai Winda, however, it is still incredibly powerful and shuts down most of the outs to him, like including battle, because Dynamorphia Rexsturm can make the attack of all of your opponent's monsters equal to your life points, which, keep in mind, at my latest locals, the lowest I got was 8. 8 life points. Even the top decks, which do actually have native outs such as Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha, have a hard time outing Dynamorphia Rexsturm when he's backed up by 4 other trap cards set in the field behind him, which can be things like Ice Dragon's Prison, which gets rid of things that would be in graveyard that would threaten him, or Solemn Strike, which can deal with things in the hand, or anything on field that could be a problem can be dealt with Dynamorphia Brute, and even things like Super Poly that can out him really easy for things like Despia. You have access to Dynamorphia Alert, which is a free monster reborn for him or any of your other monsters in the deck. Most of the time, effect damage in battle aren't even a problem anyways, given the fact that their trap cards can be reused in the graveyard to protect you from battle damage and effect damage for entire turns, which makes it really hard to kill except for when time comes into play. And so I will be putting Dynamorphia just under Marincess because Marincess has seen a bit more competitive success, even though it's most likely because people don't know what it really does, but I will put it above Branded Predaplant because I think the deck is super slept on, and I do have a deck profile that I have been taking to locals recently. I will have it up in the top right corner because I just think the deck is great right now, and it's something that you should really give a try if you like high risk, high reward decks. Next up we have Adagnister, and guys, with Marincess being a better version of the deck, there's really no incentive to play Adagnister unless you just really like the AIs from the anime. Overall, Imperm is this deck's worst enemy on Dark Templar, and even with certain extenders, it's not going to be that great to sit on like 2k towers, right? Granted, the towers is a little bit harder to out than the Marincess towers because you can just MST or Cosmic Cyclone or whatever the Battle Ocean from Marincess, but it is a lot harder to actually consistently get the towers out if your opponent has any form of disruption in the slightest. I just feel like anyone currently playing Adagnister honestly should try migrating over to Marincess if you really like the gameplay style, because overall you can just do so much more with the Marincess strategy going first and going second, and I just think it's a lot more fun. Next up we have Punk and Pile variants, which of course are going to be at the very top of our tier list, at least for now, because honestly the Punk strategies have just been getting more and more absurd. So Scythe locking and setting up mass negations with like the Adventurer package and everything like that were already a super popular way to play the deck, but now people have figured out that you can use the Punk engine to access things like Hot Red Dragon, Archfiend King Calamity, which is quite possibly one of the most broken cards in the game, because it's not an activated effect, it's like a lingering thing, meaning that nothing can stop it, a lot like Kali Yuga. Even an Imperm, in response, basically cannot shut it down, and you are going to be screwed if they can actually bring it out against you. Overall, there's so many toxic and gross things that the deck can do, a lot of them off of just 1 to 1.5 cards like Emergency Teleport, which, let's be honest, is kind of a mistake looking back on it in retrospect, but I think the deck is just going to be absolutely insane, and is definitely the deck to beat other than something like Sword Soul or Despia, and something you should look out for at your locals if it's a bit more of a competitive or pricey locals. Next up we have Pen Best Deck, baby! Is what I would say if the deck was actually good. So unfortunately, even with Beyond the Pendulum and Astrograph Sorcerer being freed, and all the other things that Pen players have been receiving, the deck is still kind of just bad. Honestly, Pendulum good stuff is just sort of really clunky compared to what it used to be, in a more simplified game state where Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite was the peak of broken Link monsters, and Zephyr Metaltron was your preferred Link 3 end piece. And we've just evolved so much past what Pendulum can actually do, that it's just kind of not viable as a strategy anymore, especially without something like Electromite. People are still also running things like Anti-Spell Fragrance in the side to go against things like Droplet and Dark Ruler, and that's literally an auto-win button against the deck, and so many other floodgates that are currently out right now. And so overall, unless you really like Pendulum, I would say just find something else to play, because Pendulum, unfortunately, is not the best deck. Next up, we have Tenyi Sword Soul, and I'm gonna put it just below the Punk stuff, kind of like almost neck and neck, but the thing is with Sword Soul is that while it is really strong and is definitely one of the best decks to beat, it is seeing a little bit less success at the state championships than things like the Punk engines, because I believe a lot more people are migrating to that deck because they want to play something new, because it's almost been a year since 10U Sword Soul's been out, guys. But also the deck is a little bit more fragile than something like the Punk engine decks, because yeah, you do have the 10Es to actually back up your plays so that it is a little bit more resilient, especially with things like Heavenly Dragon Circle to protect from things like Imperm or Veiler. But on the other hand, if you don't have something like that, a single Imperm could genuinely kill your entire day, not to mention all the floodgates in decks like Eldritch, such as Gozen Match, and, you know, There Can Be Only One. All of those really hurt the deck a lot. And so, overall, it's a little bit easier to stop than the Punk stuff, because they can't one-card combo like the Punk stuff can. And so while it is definitely one of the decks to beat, it is going to take a single slot down on the Tier 1 category. I think a little bit more so to do to representation than actual power, but we'll just have to see for now until the next ban list in, December. So next up we have Drytron, and Drytron's actually finally going back up a peg to the 1.5 category, because the deck actually has been seeing a lot of representation lately, mainly due to the fact that Cyber Angel Ben 10 has gone up to 1 more copy per deck, which you may not think actually helps the deck too much, but it does make it a lot more consistent and a lot more powerful in terms of what it can do. Even with 1 Ben 10, you're able to access things like not only your Diviner of the Herald or Manju of the 10,000 hands, but also able to access things like Artifact Lancios, can shut down certain decks, but now with multiple, it's even easier to search even more times, and a lot of the Drytron players are just going back to Tribute Summon Vanity Ruler Pass, which, honestly, as easy as it is to out with something like Imperm, is still very strong. Locking your opponent out from special summoning entirely just from using 1 Drytron effect is kind of just crazy overall, and so it's doing a lot better than people ever thought it really would. And while I don't think it's a tier 1 deck again like a lot of other content creators are actually saying, I do think that Drytron has definitely earned its keep to go a little bit higher, mainly due to representation's sake, because keep in mind, tiers aren't just based on what the deck actually does, but also how many people are playing it. But you're definitely going to be seeing a lot more Drytron players, probably at your locals or at smaller events, because Drytron is becoming a lot more popular of a deck again. Speaking of 1.5 decks, we have Eldritch, which is going to get knocked down from tier 1 down to 1.5, mainly due to the fact that I kind of want to have it like a little bit of a triangle, because Eldritch is taking a little bit of a dive in terms of representation. However, it is still doing really well. I believe it was the Central American or South American championship, don't quote me on that, where Eldritch actually won, and the deck list made me almost want to vomit. 12 floodgates in the main deck, guys. 12 floodgates, but I really can't knock it too much because it is what's winning, and it is what makes the deck a lot more viable. But we also have things like Branded Eldritch, which is technically the list that I mentioned, but Branded Eldritch has been seeing a lot more representation than something like Pure Eldritch, because the Branded package meshes so well with the Eldritch package, being able to dump your Golden Lord and get it into Graveyard for free, while also sitting on something like a Mirror Jade. The deck is in a really nice spot, and it's really cheap, especially compared to some of the other decks you could play. You can also play in pile versions like with Punk, which is something I actually tested out a little bit, because it is still a 1-card combo deck, and has a lot of grind potential compared to other trap decks, and so it's definitely something to try if you do want to play a purple card deck this format. Yet another 1.5 deck we're going to have is Flunderies. So Flunder's been doing really well overall, and it is really cheap, and so in terms of representation and power level, this deck kind of just has it all, being able to stop decks with using things like Dimension Shifter, Barrier Statue, Raitza, a lot of other things that the deck can actually do, is very strong to say the least. And I'm not going to talk about Flunder for too long, because I think it's kind of just a given that people understand that this deck is really strong, and will definitely stay strong in the time to come, especially against things like Splight when it does release, and so I'm going to keep it in the 1.5 category. Next up, we have Virtual World, and as much as it pains me to say it, I'm going to be putting Virtual World at the bottom of Tier 2. So Virtual World hasn't been doing too hot lately. Honestly, it kind of even hurts to put it in Tier 2 instead of Rogue, but I do want to give it the benefit of the doubt, because it can use things like the Adventure package, and I know it also utilizes the Punk engine, I believe now, because it does revolve a lot well with E-Telly, but overall the deck is just not in a very great spot. It's still a bit too clunky, and even with an extra copy of Desires, it's just really hard to actually stay consistent with it, especially with the Adventure engine taking up an extra slot in your hand, or more, even if you got it worse. And so while I do enjoy what the deck can do, there's really no reason to put it higher than the bottom of Tier 2 for now. Maybe if we get a new piece of support sometime in the future, it would make the deck a lot better. But in terms of consistency and even just the end board in general, the deck just ain't it right now. Next up, we have Dragon Link, which I will put at the bottom of tier 1.5. I believe I did this last time as well, and the only thing stopping me again from putting it at tier 1 is the fact that Despia and other branded variants in general exist, because Alba Lenitis in Dimension Force has made setting Albaz the death sentence for a lot of Dragon Link decks, which is why a lot of them are ending off on stuff like Baronet and the Griffin Rider more than they are, you know, the Hot Red Dragon, Archfiend, or the Spheres, which of course they do still end off on half the time. One of the guys at my locals when I was playing Dynamorphia actually said he ends off on IP to go into Unicorn now, specifically because of setting Fallen of Albaz, because Alba Lenitis can just be such a pain. It is, though, still another pile deck that can, I believe, still also take advantage of the Punk package and can still Scythe Lock, and so I'm not going to diss the deck at all in terms of what it can do, and the Adventure package actually helps it grind a little bit better than it used to, and so I will keep it in the 1.5 category, but I don't think it's going to be as popular as something like Eldritch Punk variants or just Punk in general. Next up, we have Earth Machine. Next up, we have Sky Striker. I'll give Sky Striker the benefit of the doubt, and I'll put it at the bottom of 1.5. Yes, Sky Striker is just Mystic Mine Turbo. Should I put the deck lower than 1.5 though, with all the representation it's getting and the tops it's seeing? No, I guess not. Sky Striker is still doing pretty decently, Mystic Mine Turbo or not, and while it is very far away, all the way in, I believe, November, we are getting the Magnificent Maven set. I don't know why it's called Maven instead of like Maidens or anything, but it is giving Sky Striker its new cards like Homp and Linkage, which are going to be very nice for the deck overall in terms of removal and consistency, and so yeah, I'm going to give the deck a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and just put it at the bottom of 1.5 for now, just below Dragon Link. Until it does something more in the future, I won't move it up or move it down. I'll just keep it at a nice spot right here. Next up, we have Phantom Knight, and I guess I'll put Phantom Knight at the top of Rogue, honestly. The deck is just dead, guys. I'm sorry, but with Verte being gone, the deck just has a really hard time playing like some of the other pile decks. It is still a pile deck at the end of the day, which means you can do things like Scythe Lock with Hulk and stuff with it, but at that point, you could honestly just play anything else. I believe it won a regional or two, or saw success at them, but I don't think you should really be playing Phantom Knights over anything else unless you just really love the strategy. I'm sorry guys, but it took me everything I had not to even just remove it from the list entirely. And finally, we have Salamangreat, which I will put at the top of Rogue. So not only did Salamangreat get access to almost all of its stuff back at 3, except for Gazelle, it does have Circle and Mirage Stalio back at max copies now, but it also has access to Decode Talker Heat Soul, which, while it is a bit of a strange endboard piece, is a lot better than something like Sunlight Wolf, granted, and being able to draw a bunch of cards in an already consistent and really recursive deck is really solid, especially with all the hand traps the deck can play, and so I will actually give it a little bit of credit there, because I actually did play against Salamangreat at one of my locals with Dynamorphia, and the deck is a lot better than I expected now that it has Heat Soul and with multiple copies of Circle. It is still a bit vulnerable to things like Nibiru, but single-use hand traps can actually be played through a little bit easily, depending on your hand, with things like Spinny, Jack Jaguar, and other things being able to play through disruptions so easily. But with that out of the way, that's going to have to do it for the video. I'm going to leave the tier list up a little bit so that you can actually see it. I'm sorry that this video seems a little bit rushed and that it wasn't as in detail as it usually is, but I've been recording for like half an hour, guys, and my head is already starting to go dizzy. It happens when I record for more than like 20 minutes at a time. But yeah, let me know what you think about this in the comments below, because this again is based a lot on my opinion, especially now that the competitive event scene seems to be over for a little bit. But tell me a lot of things in the comments below. Tell me what decks you've been playing over these last few formats, what decks you've taken to these big events, what you plan on playing either competitively or casually until regionals and stuff pop back up again. I don't know, it's all up to you guys, because, again, that's going to have to do it for the video. If you liked it, please be sure to leave a like, as it helps put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended, and if you really liked it and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, I do one every month, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're on our way to 1,500 subscribers, and it's absolutely free, and it helps the channel more than anything else. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.